Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome back to Access to Democracy. Alan Miller, your host, and we have a return guest. I'm always pleased to have him, and he's been coming here so long. I know him since before he shaved, and look at him now. Mike Burbach is the editor of the St. Paul Pioneer Press, which we just call the Pioneer Press, and with a long, distinguished career in journalism. Always a pleasure. Not so easy to get you back on the show. We've run into a few problems, but I'm really happy that you're here.
Well, thank you, Alan. It's always a pleasure to be here and to get the chance to visit with you about the kinds of issues you talk about all the time.
And we were talking right before we went on air about how lucky the Twin Cities are to have two major newspapers. So many communities are seeing their newspapers dry up or combine. Many don't have a major daily newspaper anymore. We have been able to sustain two newspapers here, and I think it's so important to government, to democracy. To me, maybe because I started in newspapers, that's the foundation of our democracy. It's the First Amendment, or what's left of it after the Supreme Court gets done gutting it. But anyway, now, is there a philosophy that comes down from the publisher to you that you carry forward? How does that work?
Well, the first, to just make to join your point about our good fortune in having two newspapers, it's absolutely true. We are very fortunate to have two community-minded institutions like the Pioneer Press and the Star Tribune and a variety of others. It's a rare thing today in the United States that any metropolitan area has two large competing newspapers. And in the Twin Cities, there's a good reason for that, because the East Metro and the West Metro are, to a surprising extent, surprising to outsiders, distinct places. You know, we have a reason to exist, they have a reason to exist, and thus far, despite the worst recession since the Depression and tremendous changes in the business, we've both persisted. And it's been a challenge, it will remain a challenge, but you know, it's a very good thing.
People are not reading newspapers the way they used to. I mean,
True.
It's the way I was brought up is that, you know, the first thing that starts your day is your newspaper. But I have polled some of my classes and asked, how many of you in a class of 45 students, how many of you read a paper every day? And I see one or two hands go up. And that's really disturbing to me. We have come to rely on the internet so much. And the guts of a story is in the paper. It's in the pages that you hold in your hand. And obviously that has had to affect you. It's had to affect budgets. It's had to affect personnel. I think both papers are working with less people who are doing the same job, so obviously working harder. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it's a fair statement. I'd go back, though, and be tempted to ask your classes an additional question. And that might be, how many of you are reading news during the day? And I would expect that most of them at some point would say, aye. And it's an interesting thing that probably for the Star Tribune, for us for sure, we probably have more readers now than we've ever had. Largely because of the way that you can distribute your news digitally, on desktop, on phone, smartphone,
And you have a
tablets.
good online
We do.
newspaper. I mean, it's the same newspaper expanded.
Yes.
Really.
A
from
lot
what-
more stuff. Yep.
From what you have, you got bloggers. You have things that you don't have the room for
That's right.
in the daily paper.
This is an interesting difference. So for decades and decades, photographers would go to an event and they would shoot and shoot and shoot, and in their mind all the time would be, I need to get 1 or 2 pictures. 1 or 2 pictures for the front page or for the local front. They'd still shoot a bunch, but they knew when they edited it they were going to get down to 1 or 2. Well, now we say, give us 50. We'll put a couple in the paper and we'll put 50 in the slideshow online, and people look at them, they like them. It's a wonderful medium for display of all kinds of things.
Not only give you 50, but send them back to us. They don't
Right.
have to come back into the physical building.
No.
They shoot them
Yep.
through the air. I don't know how.
They
I
shoot
don't know
them
how
through the
that
air.
works.
They do. Ben Garvin, one of our photographers, was up in a helicopter above the cathedral in downtown St. Paul, covering crashed ice, which is that crazy skating thing
Yeah.
that happens. It's a really interesting thing. And Ben's up there with his fancy cameras, and he's up there with his phone, and he's shooting pictures, and then he's tweeting them as he shoots them. So you get, almost real-time a feed of what Ben's shooting, and then he, processes it in other ways too. So these new tools have disrupted the business model. Absolutely. It is a real challenge to figure out, how are we going to get paid going into the future. But they've also made a lot more things possible. And whether we like it or not, it's the way the world is. And so we might as well control the things we can control and embrace it. Look at all these new tools and say, how can I get more news? How can I tell it better? How can I tell it in more ways? We have the ability to crunch data and to display data, whatever it may be about, that we never have had before. We have the ability, newspaper companies have the ability to break news in a way that had been reserved for the electronics for a lot of
As it's
decades.
happening.
As it's
Yeah.
happening. And what we found is many of our journalists have taken to these tools. Not every tool is appropriate for every moment, but those who embrace it figure out when it's useful. And so we'll have our reporters will go to anything from a breaking news scene to a news conference to whatever, and they often will tell the news first on Twitter, maybe with a picture, maybe not. And that will feed into a story for the website, and then it'll eventually feed into a story for print. And so these things work together in ways that we might not have foreseen when we were, some years back, when we're looking and saying, how in the world are we going to do all this? It's a challenge for sure.
Well, you do it all, and that's the amazing thing. You're doing it with less personnel.
We have fewer people than we used to, yes.
And then getting back to the editorial policy, I think it's fair to say that the Star Tribune is a more liberal philosophy than the Pioneer Press. In fact,
I think that's fair to say too.
and I have friends, particularly liberally oriented, say, why do you listen to what the Pioneer Press has to say? The fact of the matter is, I want to hear what everybody has to say, and we were talking about it. If you listen to Fox News and only Fox News, you're going to get a distorted view of everything. But if you listen to MSNBC, it's going to be the same story, maybe a little bit more factual and not quite as sensational. Fox
Maybe.
reminds me of the old Hearst type of newspapers, back to Citizen Kane days. But the fact of the matter is that you want a divergent viewpoint to make up your mind.
And that's one of the pleasures of having competing institutions, competing newspapers. The editorial policy of any given news organization is a product of a number of things: tradition, history, your sense of who your readers are, your sense of what you can be particularly useful at, your sense of what the moment requires. And different people see that in different ways. During the George W. Bush years, when he had the presidency and Republicans had, one of the houses anyway, I would get calls from people who were really upset that we were complaining about the guys who were in power. Now the tables have turned. President Obama's in his second term. The Senate's Democratic, the House is Republican. Some of your approach, or some of our approach to power, flows with where the power is. So it was George Bush's turn for a while. Now it's President Obama's turn for a while. It's true that we have a more market-oriented editorial page philosophy than some, and that, I think, can be particularly useful in a state that if it's not blue, it's purple anyway, and especially right now, we have a Democrat in the governor's office. We have Democratic control of both houses of the legislature. We have a Democrat in Washington. We have a Democrat. We have Democrats running the U.S. Senate.
Works well for me.
Sure, but we're a competing voice, and I think to a certain extent, the editorial page always ought to compete with whoever's in power. Some things we're going to like better than others, but nobody has a lock on the truth or the right way to do things. And so
who
as you
determines that editorial page?
Oh,
how does that come about?
Yeah,
we're going to write this editorial. I think you had one today on teachers, either yesterday or today.
Yep.
Who makes that decision, and then who writes the editorial?
Sure. As I said, the positioning derives from a variety of sources: tradition, history, the moment. And then the publisher and I and my colleague on the editorial page agree on a direction, and then we work that direction. So one of the directions that we're interested in is the idea, or one of the themes that we're interested in is the idea that left alone, government will simply get bigger. It's like any bureaucracy. This happens in the private sector too. Every bureaucracy or everything tries to gather more onto itself and get bigger, private or public. And so one of the checks on the public sector is a grumpy editorial page now and then. An editorial page that says, wait a minute, slow down. And ours does that fairly frequently. And so that's a product of all those things that I'm talking about. It would probably be fair to say that none of the people who have an influence on the editorial page agrees with everything that is written. None of us do agree with everything, but we've got this position, and we think it's useful. And sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong.
The difference is that that's not imparted to the reporting, so that the reporting. And that's very important for people to understand. The reporting is really straight down the middle as the reporter sees it. Obviously, it's from that reporter's viewpoint. Columnists go forward, and you put a New York Times columnist in. In fact, you put several New York Times columnists you carry. Ross Dohat, who's more conservative, or some of the others who are more liberal. And those are imparted by the philosophy of those people.
Right.
But again, not necessarily the newspapers.
Not necessarily the newspaper.
And then the citizens can speak out, and the citizens have.
They do, and they do a good job of it.
I do on occasion.
Yes, you do.
I've also had some commentaries on occasion where I disagreed with somebody's column.
Right.
And
that's if you believe in America and you believe in the marketplace of ideas, that's what you want. You want a variety over time. Nobody's got a lock on the truth. Nobody's got a lock on the best way to do things. But what we imagine is, in the marketplace of ideas, sufficient competition will produce good results over time. And I think that's really true.
How can we lessen the deficits without raising taxes in some areas? And I know that's been certainly in the forefront of not only the papers, but everybody's mind.
Right, it has. I don't know. It's, it depends on what we decide is important, and it depends on what kind of discipline we have about that decision. What's the right combination? I don't know.
So is universal health care important? Well, a lot of us think that it is, and it should be. To me, one of the things that government should provide is infrastructure, health care, and protection, certainly policing and that type of thing. Sometimes government takes off and goes a little bit too far. As somebody who supported Obama, I've been very disappointed in some of the positions he's taken, or some of the things that he hasn't spoken out on that I think that he should, and maybe just is beginning to now. So it happens also on a state level, and of course it's a state. I look at the Pioneer Press as sort of the dowager, St. Paul as the dowager queen, and Minneapolis as the young upstart, maybe in a zoot suit if we had zoot suits or something like that. And that's how I would describe, as I see, the difference in philosophies.
I heard former St. Paul Mayor George Latimer tell a story to a Chamber of Commerce group from St. Louis one time, and he was talking. Somebody asked him about the difference between St. Paul and Minneapolis, not the papers, but the communities. And Mayor Latimer said, "Well, in Minneapolis, they've got that Protestant work ethic going on. They build something and then they tear it down, and they build something new and they tear it down." And he said, "In St. Paul, we build new things too, and then we rest." And I thought that was a, pretty telling and interesting.
Well, it's interesting because we have a rail line that's going to join light rail St. Paul with Minneapolis, billions of dollars in expense. I know there's divergence of opinion there. There's a stadium that's being built. Well, you have one in St. Paul,
ballpark in
a
St.
small
Paul,
one,
yes,
a small one, ballpark, as opposed to this monstrosity that's going up in Minneapolis. And I don't know if you've taken an editorial position on that. I certainly have my own position on that, which is moved further to the right as I see the people who are really running that operation and the owners of the Vikings today. But
it's like with anything, there are trade-offs, and at the time the stadium discussion was going on the opinion page, the Pioneer Press said, let's just be frank about it. This is the way business is done. We can take our choice. We can build them a new stadium, get the best deal we can, and keep the Vikings or not, and they'll leave. Let's just be clear about this. They might not leave today, they might not leave tomorrow, but they would leave. And as with everything, there are trade-offs, and you decide, this is better or that's better. And there are lots of different opinions about what's better.
I see St. Paul on the cusp of a major growth spurt, however. It's a city where the downtown has had a lot of problems. And in fact, Jaime's, which is a business who actually does some of my clothing and gets a credit, but Anthony has made something grow, and I see that philosophy starting to go with the entire downtown of St. Paul, where you have great restaurants, but now Lower Town is really taking on a new look, and there's apparently the old Kellogg building, the old West building, is, I guess, going to come down.
Trying to figure out what
And,
to do with that, yep.
Yeah. So do
Well,
you
St.
see that?
Yes, sure. St. Paul is a great place. You know, I live in St. Paul. I work in St. Paul. I like St. Paul a lot, and it has a lot going for it. It's challenged like lots of urban centers with this transition from downtowns and retail to something else. St. Paul has a lot going on. We have more housing, apartments and all that going up in St. Paul. We've got a big grocery store coming. Lens is coming there. The light rail is going to make it easier for people to live and move around. And we also have the good fortune of having business people who care a lot about the place. St. Paul has a strong chamber of commerce. I think this is a really important thing for any city. And St. Paul has a very strong chamber of commerce that represents business interests well, and represents people who care about their community. So yeah, I'm hopeful about St. Paul. It's a long haul. But
I see the next decade of one of real growth in St. Paul. As long as you don't lose what you have now. Like Grand Avenue is unique with all the stores. Summit Avenue is incredible. With the housing and things like that. But there is room for new things.
There is. Yep.
And innovation. And I see that happening. And it's similar to Egan here. We're just about tapped out in Egan. Yeah, we have a couple of shopping centers going up and all, but we're pretty well saturated. You've got area there that looks like it's finally going to be utilized.
That's true.
And I can only see that as a benefit to the state.
Yes, I would agree. I would agree.
And to the Pioneer Press.
Sure, and to the Pioneer Press. That's one of the other roles that we see for the Pioneer Press, to be an advocate for the East Metro, for St. Paul and the East Metro. East Metro and St. Paul need advocacy. We're for them. We love Minneapolis. We like the West Metro. We love everybody else too. But it's our job to stand up for the East Metro when that's a good and necessary thing.
How old are your daughters now? I know you've got 3.
Yep, we've got 3. The twins are 4, and their sister's 12.
My twins are 54, so
I'll take your
a
advice.
little bit
Please
of
give me advice.
divergence
Yeah.
there, but
Yep, they're wonderful kids.
and
The
go to
dog is
school.
10. My dog is 10. So
Well, we
Getting up
have.
there.
In fact, you saw my book on
yes,
Toby. Yeah,
I enjoyed it too.
it's good. Thank you. I'm always willing to take a testimonial as we're trying to sell that book. We have a new rescue now. I was lost without that dog.
Sure.
3 months we started looking around. Our kids are all east. Our grandchildren, obviously, with their parents. So Sharon and I went out and we got a Springer rescue, and he's just a love.
That's great.
But a dog lends a lot to your life.
Oh yeah,
It really does. And,
Yep. It sure does. A lot of hair in our case.
yeah,
We have a
ours
husky.
too.
Yes, yeah.
You have a husky.
We have a
so
husky,
that's
and she sheds, in
a-
giant clumps twice a year. We love her hair and all.
Our guy has been an expense lately. He's run into some medical problems,
Oh,
but
yeah.
You do the same as you would do for a child.
Yeah.
There, you do what you can.
Yep,
It's,
they're great. Yeah.
so.
How are you doing? How's your show going?
The show started its 15th year in August,
That's amazing.
and I guess you've been here about a half dozen times.
Several, yeah.
And I haven't had the front office of the Star Tribune here nearly as much as you. I have had some of the sports people from the Star Tribune, although you've got a team that's got some interesting ownership there, and with the new stadium should be a lot of fun. I was at the Twins game last night, and it's like a grieving process.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
it's-
Well, it's almost over.
It's almost
It's almost over.
yeah.
Yes, it won't be long now.
But the Lynx are going great guns, so
Yeah, the links are something
Yeah,
else.
yeah, it's a
Yeah, that's
great quality of life, I find, in the Twin Cities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's expressed in the two newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And,
It's interesting, you know, I was at a newspaper meeting, a corporate meeting here a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about various kinds of news. And some of the other papers, there's a variety of sizes of papers represented in the company. And some of them were talking about food news as if it were, you know, commodity news. Just you could do the same thing wherever. And I'm sitting there thinking, no, because of what the Twin Cities is, food news is some of the best local news we have. There's so much
Absolutely.
going on.
Absolutely.
You know, interesting people, interesting places, always a new variety of, or always a changing variety of ethnic influences. It's a great thing. It's a great thing.
And as so much of the Twin Cities is, as I said, you know, having come from the East and transplanted here 17 years ago now, the quality of life, albeit I have a tendency to slip and fall in my driveway and break something.
Stop doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, the quality of life is really, really wonderful. And
And are you still teaching?
I am still teaching. We are surrounded with students from MCTC who are interning here and getting additional talents. And in fact,
great.
we just got the 2-minute signal from the control room. And they can do things with computers that I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing how the generation has jumped.
Oh, that's amazing.
And
It's changing so fast,
Yeah.
and it's going to keep doing that.
well, but I am teaching and writing and even writing to the papers on
Yes,
occasion.
I'm glad you do.
I am a curmudgeon, and
Thank you for that.
I wear
We need
that.
curmudgeons.
I wear that title proudly, and it's always a pleasure to have you here. There's so many things I wanted to talk about. It's got to be less than a year before you come back.
I'd be glad
It's,
to come back. Thank you for having
because
me.
it's a pleasure, and
Likewise.
a little bit of philosophy to give to the viewers in this last minute that we have about newspapers in their life.
Well, we newspapers are news organizations, you know, and they are evolving. Most of us continue to hang our hat on local news. We are intent on providing something that you can't get somewhere else, you know, and so we've had to make decisions about what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. That's going to continue to be the case. It is absolutely our goal to be worth your time and worth your money. It won't be what it was because the world has changed, but we expect to deliver the right kind of value. And I hope you will. I hope everybody keeps looking and making the judgment at least.
And buying those newspapers.
And buying those newspapers.
Not just relying online. Mike Burbach, editor of the Pioneer Press, always a pleasure, and I really mean come back again soon.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it.